just a couple hours.
Well, yeah. Okay, I hit. Okay, this says this Hangout on Air is now live. So people on YouTube should be able to see it now, right?
Yes, they can. And I will be going now. Thank you.
All right, appreciate the help, Jay.
Take care.
I don't see that it's live.
Okay, we have a delay. Okay, well, the problem is we're listening to YouTube and we're in the Hangout. Okay, how do you not see that it's live, Diz? Hello? Dizzy?
Yeah, hang on. I'm trying to get into it.
Get into what?
The YouTube.
And there's James.
All right.
Hello?
And he is on camera.
James, it's up to you, but you don't have to have your camera on. It's optional.
Okay. You guys not doing your cameras?
I don't have a webcam for my desktop, and Dizzy doesn't show her face.
Gotcha. Now you do.
I would camera up if I had one.
No, that's all right. I would rather not anyone have to look at me either, but since I'm already here, I'm gonna expose it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna show my face. Okay, I've shut that one down right, and then I'm sorry, I'm actually trying to make sure I'm getting here right. If I close this one down, have you
James.
I don't see a chat on this one. Are we missing a live?
There's not a chat. There's not a chat in Google Hangouts. The chat's on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm on YouTube and I'm not seeing the chat.
We see it.
Okay.
I just typed hello. Did you click on join? Because once I did, then a new window popped up and then the chat showed up.
Well, you're talking in the Hangout chat,
okay.
James. We're talking about the YouTube chat.
I got you.
Yeah, on the YouTube, we see the chat.
Aha. I see where I'm going.
This is fucking confusing with using two different fucking apps just to broadcast a simple stream.
Okay. Okay. We have everybody on and we have the chat going. And so we should get started.
All righty. And Diz, you've put out the YouTube link to everybody, right?
I did. I put it on Twitter. If everybody who's in the chat will share it on Twitter, that'd be awesome. I shared it in some DM rooms. Hopefully we can get everybody back that we had before because we got up to 12 while we were waiting. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, Jay says for some reason, the way we scheduled the live stream doesn't allow us to actually do the live stream, because if you schedule it the way we did, it requires third-party software to broadcast.
Yeah, that's
cool.
Cool.
Wow.
Well, let's. I've posted now, so let's get into it. So there's no more waiting.
Okay, guys. For anyone who's not aware or who may have just casually clicked a link on Twitter, I'm Dr. Illusion, host of Illusion Radio. My co-host Dizzy is here with me.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience.
And my good friend James is here as well. James, say hi.
Hello. Good to be here.
And tell them where to find you on Twitter, James.
I am at Jarue, Jarue 369, as in the magical numbers of Tesla. That's Jarue 369.
All right. And the reason we are here today is to discuss the relationship of psychedelics, spirituality, religion, etc. Pro or negative about pros and cons about psychedelics, and pretty much anything that relates to the two things. James said that he is on the side of not doing psychedelics. I'm very pro psychedelics, and I think Diz is pretty neutral. Does that sum things up?
Yes, I do want to say, for argument's sake, that the stream isn't to advertise drugs or to encourage drug use. It's to talk about experiences that have been had while on them and the opinions surrounding other anecdotal experiences. This is not directions to go out and find any of these. And if you do, none of us are responsible for anything that happens to you.
Sounds good. I agree. Well said.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. This all started in a DM group that Dizzy and myself are in, where someone asked me about ayahuasca, and I was sharing my experiences with it. And an older lady in the DM group got very angry and said that though I had had basically spiritual experiences and it had brought me a lot closer to God, she believed that DMT actually opens gateways for demons to possess you. And we had an all-night discussion with about 10 of us about this. Tempers flared. And so we decided that if this is such a hot button issue, it would be better done verbally than through a Twitter DM group. So here we are.
There was a long thread by a Twitter user that goes by Owen Cyclops, which that's what instigated our DM conversation. And so if you can find Owen Cyclops, or you follow him already on Twitter, I did initially tag him in the invite to garner interest for this discussion, but he did not respond to me. But his tweet was like 100 and something 100 and something thread tweet about his experiences and other anecdotal stuff. It's pretty interesting. But I am here more so for input on how the brain works and how some aspects of Christianity and spirituality and religion that I think that some of these anecdotes get wrong. So I think probably a good place to start would be each of your experiences with the psychedelic in question, whether it be, what is ayahuasca? Ayahuasca? Well, look at them using those letters in different ways.
I know, right?
Ayahuasca?
You pronouncing that right? Yeah, ayahuasca. I may not be pronouncing that as everyone else does, but yeah, I call it ayahuasca.
It's ayahuasca. It's ayahuasca. And real quick, someone in the chat just said that you're either a shroom person or an LSD person. And I disagree with that. I love shrooms. I love LSD. I love DMT. I love mescaline. You don't have to just pick one, guys.
Well, I have not. The two drugs that were being discussed in the DM group were ayahuasca and DMT, and I believe that ayahuasca contains DMT. I have not done either of those. I have done shrooms, and I have done acid, and I have done a combination of shrooms and acid, and I have done a combination of shrooms and ecstasy, and I have done a combination of ecstasy and acid, and I have done a combination of all three of those. So, in my experience, I did not have any religious experiences. I did have an instance where I thought that I was having a hallucination of the FBI arresting somebody, but that was not a hallucination. That was the FBI arresting somebody. So, Doc, if you want to start out with your, let's do ayahuasca experiences first, and then go into DMT experiences.
Okay. To begin with, since you seem slightly confused on the ayahuasca thing, ayahuasca is actually the name of a vine found in South America that is a naturally occurring MAOI, which is an MAO inhibitor. The ayahuasca vine itself will not make you hallucinate or trip or whatever you want to say. The purpose of the ayahuasca vine in the admixture that creates ayahuasca is that DMT, your body actually has a natural defense against DMT. If you consume it, there are MAOs, enzymes in your stomach that destroy it before your body can absorb it. So you could take you could eat as much DMT as you want, and it will do nothing to you because of the enzymes in your stomach that will destroy it. So if you want DMT, dimethyltryptamine, to be active orally, you have to stop those enzymes. That's what the ayahuasca vine is for. So usually in South America, if you were to go down there to do ayahuasca, it's a combination of the ayahuasca vine and some plant that contains DMT. There are a bunch of plants that contain DMT. So anytime you mix a plant that contains DMT with a plant that contains an MAOI, that's technically ayahuasca. So anytime you say DMT, you're also talking about ayahuasca and vice versa. What a lot of people do to get around the need for an MAOI is to smoke the DMT, because there are no enzymes in your lungs to destroy the psychoactive component. All that being said, I hypothetically have a lot of lab equipment in my house, and I like to play with organic chemistry and do extractions and mixtures of chemicals from plants. And once upon a time, hypothetically, I managed to extract an entire gram of pure dimethyltryptamine, and I took a bunch of Syrian rue, which is a natural MAOI, and I swallowed that entire gram of DMT by accident. I woke up about accident. I was getting frustrated because I was using lemon juice to extract it in the final steps of the process, and I had a fan blowing over it, and I got frustrated because it was taking so long. So I just drank all the lemon juice, which contained a massive amount of DMT. And about 600 to 1,000 years later, I woke up. I had been floating in a void of total darkness for felt like centuries, and I kept coming back to my body, and I would get out of bed and I would walk into my kitchen to get a glass of water, and then I would blink and I would be back in the void, and then I would be back in my body in bed. I would get up, go get a glass of water, blink, back in the void, and I'd get up to get water again. And this happened over and over and over. But it turns out I never actually got out of bed.
Okay, pause for 1 second. You're breaking up pretty bad. Can you make an adjustment on your bars?
My signal's showing to be pretty strong. James, am I
Now
breaking
you're
up on your
clear.
end as well?
Yeah, you're breaking up on my end too.
Now
Okay,
you're-
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, could y'all follow everything I said?
Yes, it was followable, but it was getting worse. We left off with you were on repeat of getting up, getting
Yes,
a drink, blinking,
yes.
and that you
In
never
the
had left bed.
in the psychedelic community, it's something we call a Mobius loop. It's when your brain just goes into a repeat, and some people consider it torture to be doing a heavy psychedelic and get caught in a Mobius loop because it can last for what feels like months or years because your time perception, we call it time dilation when you're on psychedelics, but floating in that void and feeling like I was utterly alone in the universe, like I couldn't reach anyone, no one could reach me. It finally seemed as if the void was this huge moat around a singularity, something powerful. And I finally crossed that moat, and I will only say that I talked to God and was in his presence. And that changed my life drastically. And that would be the experience that was most powerful and profound, but that was a lot of DMT, and I do not recommend anyone ever swallow a full gram of DMT.
Yeah, that's a lot, man. That's so that's something I would want to do or recommend for sure. That's cool that you play around and synthesize that stuff. That's really interesting. DMT is actually in our body too. Our body naturally produces it, and it's the same thing with melatonin. Um, you can get really, really, really crazy experiences with that too. But it's all about the toxicity. How much you do, how much you take. I worked in a wilderness camp for like kids that were like, if they did anything worse, they were going to jail. So this was like their last stand, was to come out in the wilderness. And one of my kids, he was a teenager. He was older. He fell asleep at a party. He had dreadlocks. He fell asleep at a party. He put his head down on the table, and the table, some drug dealer was there, and they had liquid acid, and they had a lot of it. And either it was a joke, I couldn't figure this out if it was a joke or an accident or what. His dreadlock dipped in that liquid acid. And so what happens is your hair acts as a wick. So it wicks the liquid LSD just right into his head. I mean, just like freebased his brain with it. And a lot of it. He didn't know who he was for, I think it was like he said all summer, and then part of school he missed school, and then he ended up coming to me, the camp in that winter. And when he got there, he still wasn't normal. Like he when I say normal, he still wasn't cognitive in an egoic way. He could function, he understood the world, but there was a psychic breach that hadn't healed yet. And it was really interesting to watch him reconstruct himself, like to watch him rebuild who he was. And that's why I think all psychedelics are really a death. It's just a simple matter of dying. In fact, the ayahuasca vine, the name it's got the word death in it. Like that, if you break down the etymology of that, it's like death root or death vine or something. And any kind of psychedelic experience is going to be exactly the same as a religious experience, in this way, in the way that the person suffers an we'll call it an egoic death, but it's probably even more. It's more like a psychic death, and that's when your horse blinders go. That's it for us just to walk down the street. like we have to turn off so much input just to be able to, move our muscles down the street. There's just so much going on. So our egos, our psychic identity naturally just says, I'm ignoring that. I'm not going to look at purple dinosaurs. I'm not going to look at machine elves. None of that's real. The only thing real is this Newtonian reality, that's in front of me. That takes a lot, like to ignore all that, to pretend like your organs are not individual people, but you are, and they all work for you. Like that, there's a lot of magic happening. 3 trillion blood cells have to have a boss, and there's something about our psychic shell, I think, that actually knows how to command every one of those blood cells to say, you belong to me, meaning your identity is not your liver. Your identity is not your lung. Your identity is this larger skin that's wrapped around that, but it ends at our epidermis. And that from there on, then we're not who we are. Like that's something that we negotiate. That's not a given. We're taught to negotiate that. And that's what's really what I think all psychedelics do, from plant allies, from mescaline to LSD to DMT to ayahuasca. All of those are causing that psychic death. And it's not the death that changes us, but it's how loose we are when we rebuild ourselves. And loose is really that's sort of the dangerous part of drugs, because during that psychic death, you are now a free agent. You technically could be changed back into whoever. You could be solved to be a preppy or someone who's like going to a law school the next day, or you could solve yourself to become someone who sells grilled cheese at a dead concert. Like it's the same person, but that person could be their awareness, their assemblage point is shifted. And so to me, that's really what makes it a religious or a psychedelic experience, is we're finding that central point of who we are, something Carlos Castaneda calls the assemblage point, and we're allowing that to implode, and it will automatically reappear again. And when it reappears, it may not appear where it used to be. Like if someone's really into sex, like if they see the world through the world of sex, then everything's an acquisition for sex, or everything's an acquisition for sensation. So even food is translated differently to someone whose assemblage point is down in their sex, like closer to their pelvis. They just see the world from the perspective of sex. It doesn't mean that they're not in touch with their heart, or they're not in touch with their throat chakra or their mind chakra or their ajna or whatever. The point is that it has to, the average of where your assemblage point is going to have to be in one spot. And that spot's called the assemblage point. And that's what working with allies, that's what working with ayahuasca, that's what working with mescaline, or datura, even the red devil plant. All those are about being able to move that assemblage point, like being able to shift that on cue. So drugs help that, but they only help, I think, because they completely destroy, they just completely rip the ladder out from under you. And so because of that, people will randomly end up in cool places. And then they'll call that an experience. They'll call that God. Not to say it isn't God, not to say that it isn't like the most transformative thing in my life, but it's not the drug that's doing it. It's their psychic death that's doing it. More importantly, it's it's how they're dealing with their psychic death that's doing it. And that's why the ritual is so important, meaning, if you're on the streets of Detroit and you're cooking meth and you just did meth and then you have this experience, your assemblage point is now being reformed around that environment of, downtown Detroit. Or maybe you're in Costa Rica at some festival, and now your assemblage point is being reformed around howler monkeys that are in the trees yelling at you. That's why that ritual is so important, because what you're doing during that ritual is going to directly affect where your new assemblage point is going to end up. And that ultimately is going to be your new identity. I'm sorry for talking so long, but I hope that makes sense.
Well, the way I often explain psychedelics to people who have never experienced them and who judge me for doing them is like this. Imagine a car driving in the same circle over and over. And imagine that as a human, as your own brain. You wake up, drink some coffee, go to work, come home, watch TV, go to bed. Wake up, drink coffee, go to work, come home, go to bed. And you end up in these ruts, or your mind, your psyche ends up in these ruts. And your body is almost running on autopilot because you've just done this so many times that this is your life. And I compare doing a psychedelic to someone sticking a ladder down into those ruts so you can climb out. Even if it's only for a night, you can then climb out of those ruts and see everything you're missing. Like James, you said that when you're in your normal sober state, you're blocking out so much so that you can go through the steps of life. It requires those horse blinders, like you said. But every now and again, I feel like I'm in those ruts, like I'm stuck in those wheel tracks, and I need to open my eyes to see all that my brain is blocking out, and to see options and things that I wasn't cognizant of. How would you consider that as a descriptor?
That's actually why I'm the guy in this discussion that's coming out saying I don't think drugs are a good idea. It's exactly because of that. Because what ends up happening is that it does exactly what you say. It breaks the horse blinders down, and now, and you calling it a ladder, I think it says it perfectly. I think that someone's going to end up thinking it's a ladder, and I'm not even going to say it's not a ladder because psychedelics are going to they're going to serve you differently than they're going to serve me. There's an ally there. There's an identity. There's an entity. You're dealing with an entity there. So they have a personality. They have they're going to interpret you differently than say me. But I know that coming away from it, it produces an assemblage point that's outside the body. It produces an assemblage point that says the key to my liberation is going to be unlocking myself using something that comes from the foreign land of Colombia, or comes from my backyard, but requires me to chemically do this. I'm not even saying it shouldn't, you can't do it that way, because now we're talking about mystical experience itself. And I know how mystical experience works, which means I'm not about to go up to someone and say, hey, that magic wand you think is a magic wand is a piece of ash wood. Because it's not. It's a magical wand because that person believes it's a magical wand. And that's why you have to be really careful when you're talking about psychedelic experiences, in the exact same way you have to be careful when you're talking about religious experiences. Because I think in both cases, humanity is bred to think that the solution is outside of our bodies. And I think that's what ends up putting the assemblage point outside of our bodies. And once you do that a few times, there's no one around. There's not enough people like me, for example, saying, that's not good, man. Like, I don't like what that does to your assemblage point. No one says that. Like, no one told me that, when I was going through this, experimenting with what I did in the 20s and stuff. No one said that to me. It wasn't until I started reading Carlos Castaneda that I started going, wait, this makes a lot more sense to me. Like, and Carlos Castaneda talks about the teachings of Don Juan is just one of many books, but he's a PhD in anthropology. He went out west and started studying with like North Mexican Indians, southwestern. I'm sure Terra Mahura isn't what he said, but just all the tribes that are there. They have a pretty rock solid science to their psychedelic experience. And the way that Carlos Castaneda was describing it, I think, is the only way that truly captured it. Not even Terrence McKenna, I think, is accurate in the way that Carlos describes it, which is, this is a plant. Like, it has a personality. It has its own agenda. It's not here like trying to give out free samples at Costco, like it wants to do what it wants to do. That's why marijuana, for example, has a really strong personality. Marijuana is a female, and she's jealous. Like, she's going to rule. If you're doing marijuana, You are in a monogamous relationship with a plant. And she is really dead serious about that. I'm not saying that means no one can ever be married, but if you really look at the relationship that you have with that plant, you start to see that this entity has certain characteristics that LSD does not, that mushrooms do not, or that Datura does not. And it's Carlos was really getting into this concept of looking at each of these plants and saying, this is the personality of this guy, and this is the personality of this one. And that's when I think you end up keeping your assemblage point maybe back inside your. Actually, you don't end up keeping it because you still fall slave to these entities. It's only when you become your own Yaqui master. It's only when you can start to walk in your own tread marks that you realize I'm the one in charge of these horse blinders. I can move my assemblage point any moment I want to.
James, you keep mentioning Datura. And for those who are listening and who might hear that and be interested, do not do Datura.
Have you done Datura?
No, but I've known people who have, and it is, no matter what kind of mindset you go into it with, it's a dark experience. From my understanding.
Yeah. And I think Carlos would say the same thing about that for sure, that the entity itself is dark. But if you look at every psychedelic, LSD might not be an entity, actually. LSD could be a black wizard, a CIA dude. I know that sounds weird, but LSD could be some kind of synthetic. God, this is going to sound weird, but it could be like a synthetic Black Mirror kind of drug that directly links you psychically to an archetype that's already been established in the 60s. Like they're able to control that. They're able to control that entity. And so those who worship LSD, and anyone who does LSD would technically be someone who worships it, is now going to be succinct to that entity's personality. You could resist it, but the point is that LSD is going to have a certain flavor to it. Ayahuasca is going to have a certain entity flavor to it, and so on and so forth. So the Indians would look at Datura, yes, as a dark force, but it's almost like they're a seagull, and every other entity out there is a polar bear. So it's no one is under the impression that psychedelics are here to serve. It's more about, enslave's too strong of a word, but they're here to fish too. They're here to hunt just like we are.
Just real quick, James, to elaborate on your point about these different plants having what you would call its own personality or its own entity. I have never done real South American ayahuasca that you would get if you go on one of those expensive retreats to see a shaman, because they use the ayahuasca vine. And I'm told that if you, in your admixture to do ayahuasca, you use that vine, then it is a very warm and love-filled psychedelic experience. Whereas I've always used a natural MAOI called Syrian rue, which from the name obviously grows in Syria in the desert. And it has been my experience and the experience of everyone I've talked to who has also done DMT using Syrian rue that it is a darker, a more soul-destroying, like I say, I floated in a void for a millennia. Whereas apparently the ayahuasca vine gives a very different experience, even though they're both just MAOIs. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It just backs up what I was saying about the different personalities.
Well, I would like to take this personality analogy. And I don't know if you're saying personality in that these are the expected effects of this particular plant. But I do not view plants as having a personality. And I don't know if that comes from an education or a religion or your own experiences with spirituality. But I have a very clinical mind and is and is in a very spiritual soul. So like I get a connection with the earth and the planet, but also I understand that the reason that poison ivy reacts differently than poison oak reacts differently than poison sumac is because of the combination of oils in each of those plants. And that's not necessarily their personality, but the effects that you have from each of the different types of psychedelics that you do, each of the different types of drugs that you do, isn't just the external impression that those substances have on you, it's also the internal expression that you have. So psychedelics work in your brain. Each of our brains is quite different in that how our brains are wired is biologically there is an expectation, but individually there are differences. And so your experience with a certain, how you say, personality of a psychedelic is not going to be my experience with psychedelic, even though within the confines of how that psychedelic is supposed to interact with your brain chemistry, the human brain chemistry, it's going to be similar. My experience isn't going to be your experience. And as these drugs have been used in religious ceremonies since the dawn of time, you kind of have to take that into effect. I want to use the Oracle of Delphi as an example. This is a woman who was in a temple that was built over a crevice where vapors came up from beneath the earth, and people could be in the room and not be affected by these vapors. Only the oracle would be affected by these vapors. But it wasn't the same oracle for all of time. It was different oracles. But they would all come to this woman, whoever she may be at the time. There was a certain age that she couldn't be an oracle anymore. It had to be a young person. To hear her directions and her guidance in their military strategy, in blessings that they were receiving for various reasons, to have crops blessed, to know whether to plant a certain thing that year, or whatever it is that they would go to the oracle for. She would give them direction based on her religious experience. But it wasn't the same experience every time that she had an experience, and it wasn't the same experience for each oracle that was occupied the position, but it was the same, not a different plant, not a different combination of plants. It was the same vapors coming from the same place on Earth. If anything were going to have a personality, it would be the exact same source over centuries. Not this plant came from here and this plant came from here and it's different. And there would be a particular personality from a particular vapor that came out of a particular hole in the ground, if personalities were to be assigned to substances, I would think. So I don't think that I disagree with with the assertion that these substances have personalities. I think that it all comes from internally, and that the expected effects come from the substance. For instance, mushrooms are a psychedelic, but they're not a psychedelic in the way that LSD is a psychedelic. Mushrooms are food poisoning.
That's not entirely accurate.
What? What's not entirely accurate?
It's kind of an old wives' tale that the reason that psilocybin mushrooms make you hallucinate is because your body is dying and throwing out crazy signals. I heard that in high school, even from my health teacher, but that's not the case.
I don't know about dying, but mild food poisoning that makes you want to vomit is definitely happening.
Well, you mentioned LSD, and I don't know if you have read much about the origin and history of it, but there should technically and scientifically, there should be no way that something measured in micrograms dropped onto your tongue should have such a profound effect on your brain. They did stuff like put dye into LSD, you know, the same dye that allows them to track things through your bloodstream to find blood clots and stuff. And as soon as the LSD hit the tongue, it was gone. Yet it has a massive effect on the mind. Pound for pound, aside from pure dimethyltryptamine, lysergic acid diethylamine is way too powerful for such small amounts. There's something going on there beyond the physical, beyond the molecular. James, you want to weigh in here?
Well, it's your receptors that are really doing the work. You know, same for all psychotropics like that. It's going to be your you know, as far as the mushrooms go, your brain technically is waiting for mushrooms. I'm not saying that every human has to have them, but your brain is equipped for mushrooms to come in and to initiate a chain reaction that's going to, you know, blow your mind. It's it's actually pretty ancient stuff too. I don't think it's an accident. This is not about. I had food poisoning so bad I saw a yellow unicorn. There's other things that are definitely happening, but there's no way that I could explain them if we don't understand that a plant is a living creature, and that a plant has because it's a living creature, it has a spin to it, or a personality, or whatever you want to call it. Like there's no way that I'm going to be able to explain how psychedelics work in a world of materialism, because that's not what's happening. What's happening is that, in my opinion, there's a psychic death happening, and it's how we choose to respond to that psychic death is what really causes the experience to open up. Same thing for Delphi. As far as the Virgin at Delphi, they actually don't. They tried to find if there was ethylene coming up from the cracks below her, but they've never been able to find that. Now, you know, she was survived for like 1,000 years as the oracle, and so it's like a long time. Lots of virgins, you know, they went through a lot of them, and so geology changes, things changes there. But it's funny how history, how our academic community will instantly dismiss any kind of supernatural or psychological experience and try and say that it's geological. It's there's actually no one's been able to prove at all that there was ethylene coming up out of the ground. That's what we think is the best way to try and explain to people what's happening. But if you look at psychologically what's happening, here's a 14-year-old girl. She's bathed at dawn. She's, you know, treated like a goddess through the entire morning. She's brought into a temple. She's placed on this altar. She's heralded. She's placed on a pedestal. She's surrounded by strange rich men, typically rich men from foreign lands. Although they saw peasants too. The point is that people were traveling from far, far away to see her, and typically it was only the rich people that could get in because she was only doing this one night a month. So it was like, get in now while you can. Whoever's going to be at the front of the line is going to be the one to get in there. So imagine being at a rock concert and imagine suddenly you're put on stage. And not only are you put on stage, but everyone in the audience is saying, your intuition is the most powerful thing in the entire world. You have to think about, well, what is that going to psychologically do to a 14-year-old girl who's now a goddess, who's now the oracle, who's now the Pythia? She's got her own title. It's going to unlock certain things in her. She's going to have a confidence now in her intuition that no one gets, because we walk through life insisting that anything divine, anything powerful, anything transformative that happens in the world is something that's not us. It's something that came from outside of us. We are living a yoke on our intuition, a heavy yoke that says we don't trust this thing. We don't unleash this thing. Our gut cannot be trusted. And I think that's part of what makes the psychedelic experience so transformative, is because your assemblage point has to reset itself. You're doing that at your age, at a different age. You're no longer 1. Now you're 20, or now you're 30 or 40 or whatever. So maybe your intuition and your confidence can emerge during that trip.
Well, what you're saying, James, goes back to an idea that's been around for a long time, which is that we as humans never actually learn anything. We simply remember things when we're taught them, that the entire wealth of knowledge is already contained within our psyche, but something has to trigger us to remember, not to teach us. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Well, I hear what you're saying. I would want to get it out of the realm of the head and put it more in the realm of the gut and the intuition, because that's what makes it a religion. Like, that's what makes psychedelics and religion are exactly the same thing. I know people don't get that, and some people find that insulting to say, but they're both doing exactly the same thing. When you're going into deep prayer or deep meditation, you are unleashing your intuition. You are unleashing something inside of you that is not just, it's transcendent. And it's only under certain circumstances that we allow ourselves to do that. One of those circumstances is if you were a virgin in Greece and they picked you that day and they put you up as oracle. Another experience is that you were at a festival with a lake with a bunch of really cool dudes and someone gave you some mushrooms and now you feel like you understand God. Both of those situations, in my opinion, are someone tapping into their intuition. Someone is finding an excuse or support to be able to do that. So as long as that knowledge isn't really knowledge as much as just pure raw divine will, it's not about really like you knew this and then you remembered. It's more about you decided to accept yourself as being this also. Like, you're not just your skin. You are now tapped into this other thing. As long as you can do that without an ally, it's when we team up with these allies, personally, that I think we get into trouble, because we enter into a vampiric relationship with a plant.
So why do we have to separate our mind from our gut?
Well, because they're two different, man is a trinity. We have neurons around our brain. The gut is its own brain too. So in a sense, you could almost argue that, not almost, your personality is 3 different urges. It's the rational mind, it's the heart, and it's the gut. But we're raised on a farm where we're kept in the head, and that's what makes us so stupid, ironically. But as we untap, as you look at the temple of man, you understand wait a minute, my gut has a completely different experience with a Brussels sprout than my tongue did. My mind thought it sucked, but man, my gut feels this energy from it that I couldn't experience before.
But
And then
why is intuition a gut thing? Because I get what you're saying with the Trinity. I think things and I feel things in my head, and I think things and I feel things with my heart, because that's where I feel affected. So I know that that's true. Like, there are instances that like something can happen to you and you get punched in the gut. Happened to me
yeah,
a little bit ago. Got punched in the gut, my heart hurt.
In
My
a
head.
few ancient cultures, the gut was called the second brain. There is a different thing. There's a different interaction happening in your stomach and your chest than what's happening in your brain. Just want to throw that out there because that has been recognized by a lot of cultures.
These areas are your most vital areas. You can lose your arms, you can lose your leg, you cannot lose your stomach, your heart, or your brain. Otherwise, you're dead. So there's a biological reason that these areas act and react.
point. Yeah, that's a great point.
But I don't believe that intuition or brain function or anything that has to do with thought, decisions, nerve experiences other than reaction happen anywhere else in your body other than your brain.
Oh, I disagree with that. Now, of course, I'm not a doctor, so what do I know? But I think the brain is more of a router.
Well, I literally had like 85% of my stomach removed. So if it's in my gut, then I've removed like part of my brain.
You mean part of your, well, if we're going to call the gut a brain, yeah, I don't think a gut's a brain.
I think that the brain is very powerful, and I think that it is in tune when you are in homeostasis. I think that the natural order of things is very beautiful. Very beautiful. I think that also our human explanations of why things happen, why we feel that way, why this is important, I think that that is also beautiful. But those are different things. There is a biological imperative in the way that your body behaves, the way that it was designed to, and there is a spiritual aspect to humans that don't exist in animals, and it's our interpretation of that. And those things exist in a parallel. And so there are things that can feel true that are not scientifically true. And there are a lot of things that happen in the brain because it's fatty tissue that conducts electrical impulses and interprets that into every sensation that we have, every religious experience, every biological function, every bit of who we are is in our brain. And it is magic.
I disagree.
You can disagree. You can disagree. Because I don't know why that's not enough for you. I don't know why the beauty of what we are isn't enough, and there has to be a different explanation with other body parts included. For me, the brain function and how it functions and how it triggers different reactions in different parts of our body is beautiful to me. And our interpretation of it, like I said, is beautiful to me. But I don't consider those two different truths that are going on. There's reality, and there is our interpretation of reality. Our interpretation of reality takes us to places that are unimaginable, which is why the brain is infinite, which is why human experience is infinite. And it's why psychedelics can open up such an incredible journey. And I'm not even saying that from I think you should go do psychedelics type of stance. I'm fascinated by by dream interpretation. And I'm not talking about the kooky, weird, if you dream about a baby, it means you're going to have a baby, or if you dream about a snail, that it means you're going to die. That weird dream book stuff is weird. I'm talking about how your brain processes information that it's taken in throughout the day or throughout your life, how it processes emotions while you sleep that you haven't allowed yourself the time to address during the day, how it runs simulations for fight or flight so that when you get into a situation that is dangerous, that you're prepared for it. And oh God, there's another function of dreams. And I always draw a blank on the fourth one. Anyway, premonition. I don't know why I always draw a blank on premonition. And premonition. So our brain in dream state functions in all those ways, sometimes individually, sometimes simultaneously. And if you remember your dreams, if you have vivid dreams and you are able to remember them, that's amazing. But these psychedelics introduce a waking, dreamlike state to access all of those things that the brain already does when we're asleep in a heightened state. And I don't know why it would need any other explanation.
Well, since you're talking about dreams, as James mentioned earlier, dimethyltryptamine is a naturally occurring chemical in the human body created in your pituitary gland. And a lot of people have theorized that that is where dreams come from, that when you're sleeping, your pituitary releases DMT, and that's what creates our dreams. And I think I was listening to a podcast the other day where someone threw out the idea that when you die, your pituitary releases a massive dose of DMT, which actually opens a spiritual gateway into the next world.
I could accept that. I could see that. Dreams are only achievable in a particular state, when your brain is in a particular state. So people with insomnia, and people who can't get to REM sleep, that stop in beta or stop in delta. Maybe REM occurs in delta. I don't have my Googles open to double check all these things. I just want you to know that I've read about them and a lot. And just because my recall is not on point right now, doesn't mean I don't know what I'm talking about. I've had a concussion.
Just real quick.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, the genesis of this whole conversation was ML saying that DMT contains demons, that there are actually demons in the drug, and that the entire point of it is to open people up to demonic influence. Does anyone want to speak on that specifically?
Well, yes, I do, in that I want to say that should you choose to do any of these drugs and you are a spiritual or religious person, please understand that if you are having a religious experience, I'm not saying that you are, I'm saying that it's possible, and that's what I would think that a religious experience would be like, being that religious experiences can be induced by euphoria from other things other than drugs. Demons are not scary. The lore around demons, which people have made up in order to scare children into behaving correctly, have created the image that they're scary. That can recall in your brain. However, actual demons that are actually tempting you into a horrific, eternal damnation are not going to come at you grotesque, scary, or any of that. They're going to come at you in the most peaceful, beautiful way to lure you further down, because if viewing one for one moment sent you running into the arms of heaven, then Satan is blowing his load really, really early. Angels, on the other hand, come from a being who is a wrathful, fearful being. And every time a human being that has been written about in any sort of Christian or pre-Christian religion that recognizes angels exist are described as grotesque and scary, and they have to be told, the very first thing that they're told upon this experience is, don't be afraid, I'm an angel.
Well,
By the way,
one man in the Bible, he wasn't allowed to see God directly, but he was allowed to see the shadow as God passed, and he was blinded for life. So no, angels and God, if they come to you, are not beautiful. They are terrible beings of wrath and judgment. I actually just heard Alex Jones say the other day, Lucifer is sexy as hell.
yeah. So if you go off and you decide to have a religious experience using these drugs that are DMT and will induce these kind of things, because like I'm saying, mushrooms aren't going to do it. They're going to make pretty paintings move around a lot. So if you're going to go off and have a sweat lodge or one of these weird South American or Moses experiences, because Moses was high, right? He didn't walk up to a mountain and like see a burning bush, talk to it, and get some rocks from it. He was high, if it happened at all. If you go into one of these experiences, in order for you to experience it correctly, I just want you to be aware that if you're going to be approached by a demon, even in your own brain, it's not going to look like a scary beast. So don't be afraid. You might be shortchanging your experience you went through all the trouble of having.
What happened to your gut? Can you talk about that? You said part of your gut was removed?
Yeah, I had a surgery where I had my stomach mostly removed.
Can you talk about, do you feel different at all after that? Like, I'm talking about, of course the surgery's going to make you feel different. I don't mean to sound insensitive, but I'm talking more about this idea of the gut brain, Can you give me any insight into that?
As far as my intuition being different?
Well, I know you didn't like that word necessarily, in relation to the gut. So, but
well,
yes,
I'm trying to answer your question in the context of how you view, in the context of how you view it.
You can call it a brain, like your gut decisions did they feel stronger, worse, no change at all? Like, I don't know. I don't even know what I'm asking. I'm just kind of fishing, I'm just really curious what your experience is, because you've gone through that.
I have a very strong relationship with my intuition. If you follow me on Twitter at all, I'm not going off and researching a bunch of shit before I start tweeting about esoteric things. Fact checking, yeah, but because sometimes you have to use dates and facts and wrap that into your otherwise esoteric message. But no, I've never had a time period, and this isn't in like relation to making a purchase or not paying my bills. I'm a human being and I make mistakes all the time with real life stuff. But as far as my intuition on people or my intuition on ideas, no, it's on point. And I'll even go a step further and tell you that I used to be very religious, more so spiritual now in a different way, because I've absorbed a lot more truth since then. But I went on a few mission trips when I was younger, and on my first one, I was supposed to go to Haiti. I didn't end up going and staying in Haiti. We were transferred to the Dominican Republic, but we did have to spend the night in Haiti. And this group that you go with is non-denominational, and there's worship every day and prayer every day. So after our planes landed and we got to the point before we crossed the border, that was our camp, for lack of a better word. We had some sermon and then also praise and worship. And in the middle of this praise and worship session where people sing songs and play instruments, I don't even know if he was a priest or a preacher or like what religion he was or if he was Catholic or Methodist. I mean, none of those things matter with a non-denominational group. But anyway, he was leading the thing and he pulled me out of somewhere mid-crowd and brought me up to the stage and anointed me with oil and the gift of discernment. And I didn't know what it was at the time or what led him to choose me or what I really don't know looking back. I was 13 years old, but I've never doubted my intuition. And I'm very, very rarely wrong. And even if I am wrong, I'm only like wrong about somebody's intentions, not not even like the whole thing. But I don't think it was an accident. And so I can't believe that particular thing comes from a different place other than my brain.
When we were on John Publius's podcast the other day, I thought about saying, after you mentioned your car accident where you had a concussion, this is Illusion Radio. I'm an alcoholic. She's brain damaged. Everyone give it a listen. And amusingly enough, based on what James is saying, the whole idea of your gut being the second brain, my producer has a third of her brain missing. Diz has 2/3 of her stomach missing, and I fry my own brain with alcohol every day. We're all just broken people, aren't we?
Hey, we are all broken people. It's just why I don't understand why this movement doesn't have as much forgiveness as it should for those broken experiences that we've all had. But that's a conversation for another time, I think. Your brain has 2 speech centers in it. One is for speaking, and it's on one side of your brain. And another is for song, and it's for the other side of your brain. And should you damage one of your speech centers, you can learn how to speak again through your other speech center. So if somebody has, let's just say, a pole go through their speech center for normal speech, part of their therapy will be song therapy, and they will learn how to speak again by singing. And it will be a really long time before it rewires to where they can speak. But so they're fully incapable of stringing together a sentence. But when given an instrument just to make a little bit of noise on. They don't have to be trained on the instrument or create a song, but if they begin to sing their thoughts, then they can speak.
That's interesting. I wonder if that song part's on the right side and the speech is on the left.
Well, I'll tell you this. I hit the left side of my brain or my head, and my concussion is on the left side of my head, and that's where I have um, some instances of aphasia, which mostly get edited out of um, in post.
Yeah, on Illusion Radio, no one ever hears that Diz has trouble speaking, but when we were on John's podcast a few days ago, he doesn't edit nearly as heavily as we do. And I'm sure everyone here on this stream, Diz will start talking and then just trail off for like 5 or 6 seconds. You'll never hear that on my show because my producer is very good at editing, but you'll definitely hear it on John's show if anyone cares to listen to that.
You can hear it on streams too. I can get on a rant and speak pretty rapidly, but I used to be a lot smoother, and I had better recall of extensive vocabulary, which I mean, it really sucks. But when it first happened, I couldn't even remember a phone number. I couldn't string a sentence together. It was ridiculous. I was angry, and I thought that I was going to be stupid for the rest of my life. It was a really hard experience for a smart girl to go through, but mostly I'm okay. I might trail off in the middle of a sentence, but I will pick right back up eventually.
Well, the interesting thing about the brain is basically you're born with the most neurons you're ever going to have in your life. Neurons being brain cells for those who aren't aware. And throughout your life, you're only going to lose neurons because you don't grow them back. But the important thing is the axons and dendrites, which are the pathways between the neurons in your brain. Every time you learn something new, you create a new pathway between the neurons in your brain, which is useful because it means you know something new. But how quickly you can think and how quickly you can adapt is not a function of how many neurons you have. It's a function of how well established the axons and dendrites between your neurons are.
Yeah.
And the way you make those axons and dendrites conduct electronic pulses more quickly is repetition, which is why we used to read our children the same fairy tale every night, because every time that repetition happens, you're strengthening those connections between the neurons of the brain. When I was a child, my mother put a tape player in me and my brother's room. We had bunk beds, me and my brother, and she had Bible stories on tape. And every single night, she would put that tape basically on repeat. So all night long, we were hearing the same Bible stories every night. And when I started reading voraciously, which was around the age of 8, I reread books. I'll read a giant book series like Song of Ice and Fire or The Black Company, you know, a book series that's like 8 books that are each 600 pages long, and I'll read them again every year or two. And people will say, well, you've already read that. Why are you reading it again? Because I want the lowest resistance possible between the neurons in my brain. Each time I read this same book, I am making my brain stronger and lowering the resistance between my neurons. James, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean that sounds right to me. I had my face peeled off, and I had to have a surgery like right where my eye closes, and so like for like 4 or 5 months, my brain was was trying to register where skin used to be. Like it was trying to really thought that's where skin was, and it would be like, "Hey man, I'm itching there because I want you to touch it because I really want to know what happened to my cheek." And it was like really, really like mental mentally difficult to have an itch and not be able to scratch it, like to not be able to satisfy what my brain wasn't able to resolve. And I really could feel the sensation of the rewiring happening. It was a constant like tapping on my cheek right at the bone where the skin was gone. And it lasted for over a year of just slowly rebuilding and rebuilding and rebuilding. And it's interesting because you feel where those neurons go, and that's what's so beautiful about how the brain works. You know, when you're injured, it's going to find a new route, but it's going to take years to really.
Oh, James, let me interrupt you right there for a moment, which is where I was going a second ago, but I got sidetracked. You're talking about how your brain can reroute synapses and functions. I mentioned Diz is concussed and apparently missing part of her stomach. I'm an alcoholic who tries to fry my brain, and my wife and producer is missing a third of her brain because for some reason part of her brain died when she was very young, and that gave her epilepsy. She started having terrible seizures.
The epilepsy is what killed the brain.
Okay. Cause, effect, effect, cause. But part of her brain died. And there's a surgery that can be done if your brain isn't fully developed yet, as long as you still have strong neuroplasticity, which you pretty much lose by the age of 15. And she was at the very tail end of being eligible for the surgery, but they cut out the dead part of her brain, which was firing random synapses and contributing to the epilepsy. Even though it was dead, it would just fire random synapses down the axons and dendrites interneural passageways.
That's what a seizure is.
And so they opened her skull up and cut out almost a third of her brain, but that the living tissue found new pathways and rewired itself to completely function without a massive part of the brain tissue. So like you just said, things can reroute, things can create new passageways. You know what I'm saying here, James?
Yeah, that's why I think we're still living in the past when we pretend like our brain is like it's the center. I think our cells themselves hold more information than we think they do, and even our organs. That's why organ transplants will have different. You know, they'll have a dramatic change in personality, in traits and desires, all kinds of things like that. All this stuff is not in our brain. We are not heads in jars. Our brain's important, but it's our entire body is who we are. It's all of the pieces of our body is what makes up what we do. And when we lose part of that, our body's going to try and reroute. It's going to try and, get around that and, regenerate. There's certain parts that it can regenerate, certain parts it can't regenerate. But it's constantly going to be trying to find a new route, which is, the brilliance of it all.
Speaking to what you just said, I assume you're aware of the stories of, for example, people who get a liver transplant and they've never smoked in their life, but as soon as they get out of the hospital, they pick up a pack-a-day habit, and it turns out that the organ donor was a pack-a-day smoker. That's the kind of things you're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a friend of mine had a heart transplant. It's but all these stories. This is how it happens. These are the things that we discover, and she's a completely different person now. She's actually really linked to her donor family. And I would argue that before that surgery, she would not have been that outgoing to like link up as intimately as she has. Now, certainly a transplant is going to do that. It's going to make, it's it's another experience, just like a psychedelic or a near-death experience. It's a huge experience. So, there's some time to shift the assemblage point. But she's literally living with a different heart now. I mean, that's a huge change. It's this stuff like that's fascinating. That's why I think it was really astute to say, if you cut out your guts or your heart or your brain, it's interesting to, that's like Descartes. How much can we chop off of somebody and still have a human? At what point is a human no longer a human? And that's when I look forward to the day when we understand the body's an electrical system, like more than we do now, because I think that's when we'll really start to untap and figure out how all these things talk to each other, how the harmonics of our bones work. The fact that we're a walking antenna that literally receives a signal from somewhere. And I think that that's what demons are. I think they're the signal. There's almost like an archetypal programmable signal, but also that's what God is. God is broadcasting his message, and we are walking crosses of bone that tune in to that message.
Real quick, since the purpose of this live stream was to discuss psychedelics and religion, I just want to share what I brought out of my deepest psychedelic experiences as far as my relationship with God. And anyone who is mainstream religious is about to call me crazy. But from my experience, I believe that God absolutely exists, but we are all God. Alan Watts, isn't that his name? Yeah, he used to say that you are God playing hide and seek with yourself, because God is floating in a void, like I was talking about earlier. There's boredom and loneliness in that void. So he creates something like Earth and sentient people on Earth and puts himself into those people and makes them forget that they're actually God, and then gets to basically play chess. And it alleviates the loneliness. I think that we are all facets of God. We are the same. We are the great consciousness of the universe. It's kind of like the idea that we're all in a simulation, but it's different. Sorry, I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, there's like God turned himself inside out and unfolded himself so that he could experience who he was, experiment in self-discovery, as it were.
I think that the analogy of psychedelic experience as being a death of the psyche may be true for some people, but I think in a lot of instances that it is life. In a different way, because you can live your entire life without ever having an experience with psychedelics or wanting to. And you can have religious experiences through other forms of inducing euphoria. For instance, if you go to a large religious concert, or a large religious praise and worship session where there's hundreds and hundreds of people all focusing on the same aspect, and that is to get closer to God and to pray. People come away with all sorts of religious experiences that they've had, whether it be feeling like they've spoken in tongues or have had a healing experience, which I actually have been a part of, a physical healing. I've seen somebody's bone structure change underneath my own hands. So the death analogy can be true. I think that people can get lost in it because ultimately we are fragile beings, and our psyches are fragile. And if you don't have enough life, enough to live for, enough faith, enough going for you in the tangible reality, then certainly those experiences can become more than what they're supposed to be, and you can become dependent on them. But I don't think that in every case, that's the expectation. I don't think that everybody's going to lose themselves. I don't think that everybody's going to accidentally take so much acid through their hair that they break their brain. I mean, that's a really sad story, but it would take a person either accidentally doing that or just so much all at once, intentionally doing that in order for that to happen.
Are you guys familiar with MK Ultra?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah,
For a second.
the CIA was messing around with psychedelics, thinking that they could be used as a truth serum, and they didn't just experiment on random people; they experimented on each other. And one of the agents put a few hits of acid in one of the other agents' coffee mug without telling him. And that CIA agent kind of lost his mind because he didn't know he had been given a psychedelic. He had no clue. And it caused him a lot of problems. And a few weeks later, he jumped out the window of a high rise because he could not bring his reality back in line with what he had seen when unknowingly dosed with a psychedelic. And I don't think there could be a more fucked up thing to do to a person than to dose them without their knowledge. I can't imagine what it would be like. Because of my own experiences, I would recognize pretty quickly that I've been dosed. But can you imagine doing it without knowing it?
No. I had an instance of vertigo not too long ago, which I ended up going to the hospital for because it's so bad. But when it initially started, I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell if I was sick or if I had been dosed with something and I was hallucinating, or if I was having some weird sort of heart attack. It was a very scary experience. And I hadn't been dosed with anything. It was just my brain was having to overprocess where reality was, that it was making me sick. So I can imagine sort of what it would be, and because I've done some psychedelics, nothing to the level of DMT or anything like that, but yeah, I can imagine what that would do to a person, because just not knowing that my brain was working so hard to tell me which way was up and down was terrifying enough as it is. And I didn't even hallucinate.
James, you said you're familiar with MK Ultra. What are your thoughts on that program and what happened to a lot of the people who were involved in it? If I'm not mistaken, was it Ted Kaczynski that was experimented on, or was it someone else? My brain's not.
Yeah, he was pretty. He did a lot of acid. A lot of CIA acid. I'm saying CIA. I don't know which organization it was, but he did a lot of that. I don't know if that's what. I don't know if that's how they activated him. Because MK Ultra is just going to happen through trauma. You can just program someone through trauma. But I personally, I think the label MK Ultra is actually a front, because it gets this impression in people's mind that MK Ultra is some program in some building somewhere, and only those people that are in that building have been subjected to it. Like it almost makes it look like something that's not actually happening. But instead, every single word that's uttered by anyone in control is a really important, vital part of MK Ultra. Media, Hollywood, these are all shepherd programs, and so MK Ultra is built into that. The white lab coat that a doctor wears is part of that ritual. It's part of that voodoo trance. That's why the placebo is so misunderstood, but also so hidden. Which touches on kind of what I've been trying to say the whole time, which is that this is more about tapping into psychedelics are tapping into something that's already inside of yourself. And if you read Carlos Castaneda, he explains how that happens. He explains how to do that. And that even though he's talking about the plants and talking about the allies, the entities that they are, the whole time he's explaining, I don't want to be in a codependent relationship with a plant. I can just do this myself. There's no reason why I need to set this up or acquire this or whatever. There's no difference between someone handing you a sheet of paper that's blotted with acid and someone handing you a magic wand that you believe will cause something to shift inside of you. I think what ultimately is happening is the same thing that happens at Delphi. Someone's having a psychic death, and the results from that are they have more confidence in themselves than they've ever had before. And there's a will thing. You really have to, and I can't scientifically prove that, which is why I'm sort of hesitant to talk about it, because I completely reject materialism. Like anyone who thinks that the world is like made of physical objects, I just know that that's just so wrong. But also, when I hear that, I realize there's no way I can explain how will works. There's no way that I could explain even how magic works or how demon technology works, because we're talking about a situation where we're in a world that is material, that everything is an object that's not imbued with life. And when I used to see the world in that way, there's no way that I would believe in the things that I'm talking about now. I would still be lost in the, well, what does Wikipedia tell me the world is? Versus, well, what does Carlos Castaneda say about that? Or how does that pertain to the Gnostic texts, which talk about elves? Why do these creatures, why are the same creatures activated on someone who's doing meth? He makes eye contact with a shadow being that has red eyes, and because he makes eye contact with him, that shadow being turns and starts to approach him. Or more importantly, why is his buddy who's doing meth, why can he see the same thing? Like, what the fuck's going on? Like, what is actually happening? But as long as we're in the realm of material, there's no way I could even explain that stuff, because it just sounds so out there, so.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up meth in a discussion of psychedelics. I flirted with crystal methamphetamine when I was in college, and I once stayed up for 5 days without eating or sleeping. And those of us who were regular drug users called it the shadow ninjas. Once you've gone long enough in sleep deprivation and food deprivation, you start to see things out of the corner of your eye, and you're constantly turning your head trying to see it. But I just remember being holed up in my dorm room in college, watching the door, convinced that the doorknob was turning and that someone was about to come into the room and kill me. And my dorm room didn't have a private bathroom. So when I had to relieve myself, I would have to walk down the hallway.
Mhm.
And every time I had to walk down the hallway to the restroom, I thought I was in a mental institution, and I thought I could hear crazy people screaming their brains out in the other rooms. It was a miserable experience, and I never did methamphetamines again.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. Like it, those horse blinders have come off, and you're tuning into things that you naturally have to tune out just so you can just survive, just so you can get through in the world. Um, that's
Yeah, but
real
that's a
phenomenal.
predictable result. That's a predictable biological result from not getting REM sleep, from not entering a dream state. It's a predictable biological result. So yeah, we all see similar things because I've done it too. We all see similar things, but then it interprets it with your specific experiences. For instance, I had a state where I had stayed up too long, and I was outside sitting on the porch. None of my friends were there. I don't know where they went or why they went somewhere, because I was trying to turn myself in to go sit out a ticket, and I didn't have a ride. But so I'm sitting outside, and it's the shadow ninja time or whatever. Um, and I'm fully convinced at this point in time that it's my friends, or reality check. Those aren't friends. But at the time, I was like, why is uh Tina over there peeking out from behind that bush? Because it looked like Tina. But had I not, I was imprinting my own experiences on a phenomenon that was going to happen no matter who I was. Because when your brain doesn't get enough sleep, when it doesn't get to rest, when it doesn't get to play out its 4 stages of whatever it does while it's dreaming, your brain will start to dream while you're awake in order to keep you alive.
Yeah, I think that is a very plausible explanation. And again, anyone who's listening, don't do drugs, and specifically don't do meth. It was a nightmare. I was a college student. I made a mistake. Don't ever do it. It is the most evil substance, the most evil substance possible.
That and heroin are 2 substances that I will say that I agree with James fully on. That is a psychic death, and it absolutely steals your soul. Absolutely steals your soul. There's no 2 ways about it.
James, if I may try to state your position on these things, you came into this saying that you are against psychedelics. Now, is it because you believe that we should find truth within ourselves without relying on a crutch or an external substance? Is that your stance?
I'm not against psychedelics. That would mean I would have to be against any form of ritual, any kind of magical crutch, any kind of even lighting a candle and just trying to relax at night. It's I I I think that if someone's looking to expand themselves spiritually, and they think the way to do that is to do mushrooms or DMT, um, that's a decision that they should be able to make. I do think drugs should be legal. I don't think that there should be a law stopping people from ingesting a plant. But I think that I would rather them read Carlos Castaneda first and just read it, and then go experiment. Because what you're going to do is you're going to go to a party somewhere, and there's going to be people there, and it's that's what's happening. And you're going to enter into, because drugs are illegal, you have a bottleneck. And whenever you have a bottleneck, a vampire shows up to feed. And vampires love to be drug dealers. It's like one of the favorite things they like to do. It's when you are a drug dealer, you were a slave trader, and especially if it's a good drug. And it's hard to find a good drug dealer, like someone who's like, I'm not saying they're not out there, but it's you're entering into a world where there are sharks, and you're pretending like you're in a world where there's sharks, and you don't know that you're about to psychically kill yourself and then try and pick yourself back up again. And that experience is going to be something rewarding and fun, is what you're hoping. But what's happening is when you're doing that, you are also now prone to the people around you and all of their epigenetic demons that live inside.
I can't hear James. Is this a connection issue on my end or what?
No, he cut out because I can't hear him either. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. While James figures out what's going on his end, I also want to bring up the idea of shared hallucinations. You have very broad instances of this, like with dimethyltryptamine, DMT. So many people talk about seeing machine elves, these crazy, weird looking beings who come to you and want to play with you and talk to you. And I've never experienced that on DMT, but a lot of people have. Now, there was one time there was a shared psychedelic experience. It was me and my wife and another couple, Stephen and his wife. We were all at my house, and we took quite a lot of shroom tea. And the strongest psilocybin mushroom strain is called penis envy. Everyone laugh, but it's called penis envy. And I brewed up a pot of tea with that, and the four of us drank it, and we all felt like there was just a hand crushing us to the floor. Steven's wife was laying on the floor, rolling around, going, "Make it stop." And Steven was just laying on the couch, and he couldn't move. And I forced myself through it. I stayed upright because I didn't want to give in. But that was four people who had taken the same mushroom tea who all felt like an invisible hand was just crushing us into the floor. But after 30 minutes, which is what I call the come up for a mushroom trip, we all got back up and were like, wow, that was intense. Yeah, that was definitely intense. And then I put on some Native American flute music, and everyone just went silent and listened to like an hour of this flute music. And when it ended, we all just shook our heads and were like, wow, was that as intense for you as it was for me? And everyone's like, yeah, dude, that was intense. I was in another place. So I have experienced shared hallucinations, but I'm wondering what you and James think about that.
Well, okay, so I think that there's a difference between a shared effect and a shared hallucination. And I distinguish between hallucinations as the thing, the environment that you're transferred to. For instance, the feeling of a hand pressing down on you would be, what did I call it before? An effect would be a shared effect. And you all drink the same substance, so it makes sense that you would have a shared physical effect. Now, I had done acid one time at a rave, and then went home and took a shower, and then I had to drive two people like to Fort Worth. So driving, and it hadn't kicked in yet because I took it like as I was leaving, not as I was beginning. But so as I'm driving, the road bubbled off. And I would drive to the end of the bubble, and then I would be at the beginning of the bubble, but obviously the scenery didn't change around me. But how do I explain this? The 50 feet or 100 feet in front of me became a bubble. I drove to the end of the bubble. There was another bubble. And I could watch the road become a bubble. So it was a very weird spherical experience where the earth around me was breaking up into bubbles. The two people with me had taken the same substance as I did, but they did not experience the visual bubble situation. That was something that came from me because I was focused on driving and being concerned about whatever it was in my brain that I was concerned about. Now, had we all had the bubble experience, then I would probably be more open to a shared hallucination experience rather than an effect. And I think that you're interpreting it as a hand. Did you all interpret it as a hand, or did you all interpret the pressure?
Mistress, you were there the night that me, you, Stephen, and Aniela did penis NVT. And I said it felt like there was a giant invisible hand pushing us all to the floor. Is that how you felt?
Yes, it was incredibly uncomfortable.
And you remember Aniela was rolling around on the floor going, make it stop, make it stop.
Yes, and I felt like I was being pressed into the couch. I couldn't get up.
So it was like a shared gravitational effect.
Yes.
For those who aren't aware, we've lost James. We thought it was just an internet issue, but he has apparently lost power at his house, so his computer's gone. Anyone who's listening right now who would be interested in joining the live stream, let us know in the chat and we'll send you a link to come in so you can talk instead of just listening. But for the moment, as I said, we made tea from the strongest mushroom available, which it's called penis envy. I wish it was called something else because that sounds silly. But
I've done the same thing. I mean, it wasn't a tea. I ate it, but penis envy.
Once the pressure came off of us, we were so giddy and buoyant. And as I said, we put on some Native American flute music and we all just froze. And we just listened to this entire CD of Native American flute music. And when it was over, we all just looked at each other like, whoa, my God, that was intense. Like we were all seeing these same beautiful images and having these same beautiful thoughts.
And see, I'm curious whether you can immediately after a trip is not the time to write a dissertation about your trip. You know? So, did you see the movie Avatar with the blue things?
Yes, I've seen Avatar.
Okay, so that's an otherworldly, ethereal place. So if you had all heard this music and all been on that planet, that Avatar planet, that I think would be more of a shared hallucination. But there's a possibility that you were on Avatar planet. Mistress was in New Zealand, which is where like Lord of the Rings was filmed. If you haven't seen any pictures of New Zealand, that's the landscape of it. And then one of your friends could have been in like a really beautiful lush rainforest, and then whatever the other one might have been in a like really beautiful desert. I don't know. I don't know where that music takes you personally based on your experiences, your desires, what makes you happy. Because somebody who doesn't like a tropical beach wouldn't go to a tropical beach in their mind on a trip. They would go to what makes them. So some people like tropical beaches, some people like mountains, some people like forests, some people like weird otherworldly places. So it'd be interesting to have a detailed account from each of you what you saw during that time period, because the effect is this music induces my imagination to go to my happy place because it makes me happy, and so I'm in a beautiful place. So then you would all be in a beautiful place because the effect that it has is it takes you to a beautiful place. But are you sharing a hallucination in that you're all at the same place?
Mistress, could you describe where you were when we all just zoned out listening to that flute music that night with Stephen and O'Neill?
It's been so long at this point, I honestly can't recall, but I wasn't, from what I can remember, I wasn't much of anywhere.
It's certainly a great thought experiment that if you're already going to be having these experiences, that if it ever occurs again, to make it a point to describe individually without talking to each other about it, what it is that you saw in those moments and experience, to find out if you did have some sort of shared experience. But I would think, do you go individually or do you go together? Like, you know, those movies where like they do the virtual reality thing and then they're all in the same video game or whatever. Like, is it more like that, or you're just simultaneously having a really great experience based on your own particular set of preferences?
I can't really speak to that. I don't think. I mean, I think for the most part, anytime we've done these group trips, probably we were all each in our own headspace. The only time
the curiosity for me extends to like experiences with like pagans who would ingest various, I don't know what the rituals entail, but I do know that there were rituals in, you know, equinoxes or certain times of the year where the whole village would go and have commune with their gods. And sometimes that involved drugs in order to be able to reach to your gods.
Right.
And that's common. It is very common in many religions. It is very required in a lot of religions, that if you're going to, it's a part of the worship. It's a part of the ceremony, that you're not actually going to the other world or the other plane or opening yourself up enough to experience it without going and using some sort of psychedelic.
Well,
So
yeah, and I would think
I wonder if they had.
I would think in a situation like that where it's, you know, it's religiously focused, and you use the example of a group of pagans coming together to
I'm trying
be
to not
with
say
their,
orgy.
yeah, they all generally are expecting the same thing. And so I would think that would lead to a higher likelihood of a shared vision or experience.
Well, talking about shared hallucinations, there was one time that me and Mistress were alone, and we had taken some mushroom tea, and we were both feeling that uncomfortable gravity that I mentioned earlier. So we went into the pitch black bedroom and laid down in bed, and then we started touching each other, and things got interesting, and we both...
Yeah, I wasn't going to bring that up because that's...
We both thought we were wolves.
Well, yes, we during that whole thing, yes, we had a few of the same visions.
Interesting.
And at one point felt that we were speaking mind to mind with each other.
Yeah, like our consciousness was transferring back and forth between bodies. I was her, she was me, then I was me, then I was her. And during the whole thing, we thought we were animals. It was quite a wild experience.
Yeah, I wasn't going to bring that up.
Doc is very open, if you haven't gathered.
That's an understatement.
Well, it's a shame that we lost James. It'd be interesting to hear what he said about that.
Well, I don't know how many of the people listening came from James and how many came from our side of things, but someone said earlier in the chat that what is James on? He's talking crazy, but that's just James. James has been on my podcast. He's a very smart guy. He's really cool, but he has ideas that are out there, but there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing saying his ideas are wrong. They're just different from what we're used to.
Yeah, but that's I mean, it depends on who you're talking to, and like in our movement, there are pagans, and so if you're a pagan and you're not having pagan experiences with your everyday life, I don't know really what your point of doing paganism is. So I hope that there are people out there that think like that, but I mean, the idea of something expansion, because I already believe that we're all connected throughout history and throughout the universe. I believe in cellular memory. I do think that there is a wealth of information that is stored that we're born with. And I don't know if we know more about it when we're babies and we just can't talk or remember it, or and then it fades over time, or if these plants exist in order for us to be able to unlock um, our brains to be able to do that, because there's a lot of automatic things that our brains have to focus on, and then we've built these societies and we have to operate in these societies, so we have to manage our time. We've created clocks. Before we had clocks, we created a way to track the sun so that we could be on schedule to things. We've learned how the world around us works. Before we even knew what gravity was, we knew how to build cathedrals of just incredible detailed structures that how did they figure out about keystones and how to prop buildings up that are ageless unless they get knocked over by us, or in complete disrepair, or a mountain springs up or an earthquake shakes it down. I mean,
Unless
these
they're in
castles that
Damascus
were
and Trump and fucking Israel drop bombs on them.
I don't did they destroy any building? I thought that it was an airstrip. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm fairly certain that they didn't actually damage any historical buildings.
Israel has been shooting missiles into Damascus.
Oh, Israel doesn't give a fuck about Damascus.
Well, I do.
Well, I do too, but I just did we destroy any historical buildings in Damascus? I don't want any of those buildings. There are a lot of buildings all around the world that it's a marvel that they were even built. And I would posit that the people that came up with the ideas in order for those to stand and be so freaking timeless. I mean, here we are in 2019, and we can't build buildings that last longer than like 50 years. Well, I mean, if we built a building now, we wouldn't know for 50 years if it would last that long, but it's very easy for our buildings to become dilapidated with disrepair with a short time of neglect. Wherein,
Well, I'll
wherein
just
in the
throw it
South,
out there that thankfully Russia provided Assad in Syria with some pretty good anti-missile defenses, and I think they managed to intercept and shoot down about 3/4 of all the missiles that were fired into Damascus on the night I'm talking about. But still, we have to have some respect for our history. And this is the
absolutely.
oldest city in the world. We shouldn't be bombing it.
I agree. But back to what I was saying, prior to having any sort of mathematical experience to lay out equations that engineers would use today, we built buildings, castles and cathedrals and other important buildings that have been timeless. And they built that without knowing how gravity works or how physics work or any of it, because none of those equations had been invented yet. Nobody knew what they were.
Diz, have you ever heard of the stoned ape theory championed by McKenna?
No.
It's the idea that we evolved from base hominids like chimpanzees and gorillas into modern day humans because changes in the climate forced us out of the trees and onto the plains and the savannas, where we found psychedelic mushrooms and ate them because we had lived in trees for so long. We didn't know what anything was on the ground. And so these proto men ate psychedelic mushrooms, which cause your pupils to expand, which gives you sharper eyesight and allows you to see farther because you're taking in more photons, obviously. And that is how we learned to live as a ground species and use tools. Terrence McKenna goes deep into it. I don't necessarily subscribe to it, but it's an interesting theory.
I don't subscribe to any theories that insist that I evolved from a monkey. I do believe in evolution. Um, I believe in God. I believe that God set into here's an infinite being that has to live infinitely in the universe, mostly alone. I don't believe that they would fast track a planet's development over 6,000 years. So I don't buy into any creationist, exactly Genesis bullshit. Um, it would just take a nudge of something that he has power over to begin to create the billions of years um, that scientists have posited that it took life to advance to where it is. So I believe that both things are true simultaneously, that God exists and purposefully created the circumstances that life sprang from. I just don't believe that he did it in 7 days or that the days mean specifically 24 hours either. So, so I don't believe that we evolved from chimpanzees because I don't think that chimpanzees would exist had we evolved from them. They do exist, therefore I don't think that we evolved from them. But,
well, what I'm saying isn't, of course, as I said, I don't necessarily subscribe to that stoned ape theory, but I'm not trying to posit that we evolved from gorillas or chimpanzees.
No, I didn't think that you were, but I was also positing that the reason that these structures got built is because people got high as fuck.
But with the gorillas, chimps, and humans, we are divergent evolutionary groups. But if you believe in biology and evolution at all, you have to realize that we did have a common ancestor. That doesn't mean that an ape turned into a human. It just means that, 40, 50,000 years ago, some ancestor of us gorillas and apes came down out of the trees and stood up on 2 feet.
Okay. So they came down out of the trees and decided to get high as fuck, and then they figured out gravity before gravity got figured out. I mean, it makes sense.
End of the world, whoever you are, what are you shouting no about? Sorry, there's just someone in the chat say no, 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 and I'm curious as to what exactly we're saying that is upsetting them so much.
Probably having beliefs within a belief system that are outside of the belief system, but what are you going to do?
What am I wrong about, end of the world? What am I wrong about? And you're welcome to come on the live stream. You can come on and talk. I'll send you an invite if you're interested in disputing things that I'm positing. But let's continue our conversation, Diz. Sorry for derailing there. So you say you certainly don't think that we evolved from chimpanzees, apes, gorillas, etc. And I agree. And I say that there is a common ancestor. Every single organism on Earth has a common ancestor. There is some single-celled organism in the prehistoric ooze that is a common ancestor to us all, unless you think that God waved his hand and created us out of whole cloth. And I won't dispute any arguments about that because I don't know.
No, I don't know either, but it doesn't make sense. And I'm just too narcissisty to believe that I was ever like a monkey. So I just can't go there. It can be similar but separate in my personal cope. I'm coping. Even if you believe in the creation story from the Bible, which, by the way, that's a Jewish book. So take that interpretation with a grain of salt. It is. It is. How can you take at the interpretation that we've been given our entire lives and throughout history that's brought us to this point where we are and go, that was kind of arranged for certain people to come out on top. Where am I at in this? Jesus came to absolve me of my sins so that I could reach heaven. Where do I exist in this? And if you're not questioning what you've been told and you're staring at an anti-pope with a corrupt Catholic Church with every Christian institution under attack the way that it is, whether it be the congregation that's being misled or it be the actual institutions that have been invaded by soulless child molesters who served no other purpose than to break the faith of hundreds of thousands of people that don't trust in the church anymore, that have broken the bonds that are formed there, those pillars of the community. We use that term, pillars of the community, are pillars of our community, of our society, which we have formed upon, whether it be Catholic or Protestant. We have formed based around these beliefs and these trusts. And that trust has been broken. And that is by design. And it's through the history, it's through the verbal telling and retelling of something that's being told incorrectly, even though the information may be true right before you. But the belief is wrong. The interpretation is wrong. The allegory has been taken as fact, and the fact has been taken as allegory, and it's been mixed up. And that is false prophecy, and that is written all throughout the Bible. So all these things that we're investigating with our minds, we're supposed to be doing that. We were told to do that. We were told that we were going to be lied to. In the Bible, the Sermon on the Mount specifically says that you're going to be lied to, and that you have to take it upon yourself in order to examine this. And the only book in the Bible that says that you will be blessed if you read it and know it is the book about the end of times, where everything gets fucked up because nobody was reading the Word of God correctly. So if you want to be offended by an investigative conversation about the way the mind works and God works and the world works, then I don't know, throw away the entire last 2,000, 3,000 years, because that's all people did, is try to explain this and try to work within it and try to become better.
There was a time that evolutionary biologists and whatnot thought that we had genocided the Neanderthals, but it turns out that we didn't. Homo sapiens did not murder all the Neanderthals. We bred with them. And interestingly enough, only white people have Neanderthal DNA. And that was, again, a fork in the evolutionary tree that kind of made white people. And the more Neanderthal DNA you have, the higher your IQ tends to be. They had bigger brains than Homo sapien. But when you call someone a Neanderthal, they take it as an insult, as if you're calling them cavemen, but they were smarter than us. And
some people believe they were aliens.
You want to expound upon that, Diz?
Nope. Just letting you know that there's people out there that think that Neanderthals are aliens.
But I'm not going to discount that possibility. They were, from all accounts, they were a peaceful people. And the early Homo sapiens pretty much wiped them out, but also bred with them. I've never heard the theory that Neanderthals were aliens. Could you say anything more about that?
My mom watches some weird shit. It's this station. It's a station called Look, I can't. I didn't watch it myself. It was just like my mom was like, I was watching the show and they said that Neanderthals were aliens, and I was like, no, it's the Jews. And I walked off. I mean, what do you want me to say? Some sort of Gaia TV station. She's trying to find out like a really long way around the part where I'm like, it's because of the Jews, and the Jews are evil, and the Jews are demons. And she's trying to like rationalize that there could be other shit that's going on or whatever, where she doesn't have to like say that the chosen people aren't the chosen people. She's just like, she knows that I'm right. She's just coming to me with different shit that she sees on this Gaia TV, where they're like, oh, well, the Neanderthals are Asian or aliens, and there's Hollow Earth underneath Antarctica, and that's where some aliens came from. I don't, she tells me the thing that she learned on the Gaia TV, and I say, Mom, it's the Jews. It's the Jews, okay? It's the Jews. So I really can't expound very far on the people bred with aliens thing.
Well, Alex Jones says that the aliens are already here. And we created the alien by crossbreeding humans with rats and pigs.
Somebody's YouTube again.
Jay, you're echoing.
My YouTube isn't up.
Hello?
Hello.
Someone's
Yeah, it's you.
Shouldn't be me. Is that better?
Sound check. Nope,
Sound
still
check.
echoing.
All right, hold on.
We're getting into all kind of interesting religious shit, and then now we have an echo.
Well, now it's gone.
Oh,
Now
yeah,
it's gone?
the echo's gone.
All right, I fixed it.
What was that, Jay?
It was just that my phone was being charged, so it's a weird thing. One of my favorite episodes of the Paranormies involved the A word, which was either aliens or Atlantis. So I had to hop on to talk about this.
Well, give us your opinion, my brother.
The theory posited by Horus, the White Rabbit, was that this all stems from Atlantis because of Atlantis being the lost city, which isn't really a lost city; it was just a moving city. But a lot of ancient religions have visitors from different. They have stories that all involve either blondes with blue eyes or redheads with green eyes, and they depicted each individual access of these former meetups, where down in like Quetzalcoatl or somewhere in South America, where they had a god that was described as redheaded and green-eyed and much taller. And various other Asians and that described these gods that they called. So when like Cortez landed, they didn't treat them as an invading army. They just thought that their gods had returned. So I don't remember how exactly it went, but there was a strong link to the possibility that there was gods having had visited that were of what would be a European or Nordic descent. But it's one of the best episodes of the Paranormies, and they had tons of different things that you could go back to and research for yourself that were being clued in, like per the episode.
Yeah.
I love the Paranormies, and the host is a friend of mine and a fellow electrician. Awesome
Yeah,
guy.
it is. Johnny's good people.
Let's get him on this show.
Johnny has been on my show, and when Johnny was on my show, he did an Alex Jones impersonation and a what's the soy
Paul
boy?
Joseph.
Paul Joseph. He did a Paul Joseph Watson impersonation that was fucking amazing.
Anyway, so you see that even though I can't go into detail about the Neanderthals being aliens thing, that it's entirely possible that the Neanderthals were aliens thing. And there's cave paintings with weird flights on them, and there's really, really old paintings with clouds that look like flying saucers. These aren't edited things. These I know that we live in an age of Photoshop where you can make anything weird appear in a painting that you want, but I mean these are actually on the paintings. And they've been painting these weird creatures and these weird crafts, aircrafts maybe.
My friend my friend James,
a long time.
my friend James that was on the stream for the most of the night shared a picture on Twitter the other day of an old cave carving, and it was a stegosaurus. The spikes coming out of the back, the tail, everything. It was a cave carving from prehistoric times where a human drew a stegosaurus. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, there's a large portion of the alt-right that don't believe in dinosaurs, but I'm not part of that portion. I believe
The
in
bones were planted
dinosaurs.
by the Jews, apparently.
Well,
Right.
there are a lot of people who disagree with the idea that the dinosaurs were long dead before humans came about. But if you have humans painting in caves pictures of dinosaurs, what does that mean?
I don't know. I mean, it was a really long time ago, so it's possible that there were a lot more skeletons that were available for uh, perusing.
And we
You
are
know, we
talking
have,
about Ice Age, so could have been stuck in ice.
yeah, it could have been stuck in ice fully whole.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they saw them. Maybe they existed at the same time. Maybe they just ran across lots of bones that were intact. I mean, they made their weapons out of something. They made
Mm-hmm.
some sort of bone,
Yeah.
and not all of that stuff survived in archaeological digs. So,
My buddy likes to point out the theory of plate tectonics and how um, you would think that would come across as somebody who was oops was in the field that came up with the theory, but in reality, it was a meteorologist, and he had a toy um, of the Earth, and it was plug and play with the different the different continents. And his son was mashing a couple together, and he was talking about like how the flora and fauna match in certain parts of North America with certain parts of Africa with certain parts of Asia, and how they all interconnected. And he posited this back prior to the turn of last century and was absolutely laughed at and disgraced. And it took another half a century before his thoughts, which were shunned because he wasn't in the community, were finally looked at in new light and given more credence when you could literally see how certain parts of the countries can almost perfectly align with other continents. So the theory of Pangea was put forth several decades after this guy was laughed out of some sort of gathering of dumbasses who worked with continental shift and Pangea and whatever, flat Earth or whatever.
All right, Jay, what psychedelics have you done?
Just shrooms twice.
Well, what was your experience? Share with the class.
I felt so insignificant on mushrooms that I was pretty sure I could get away with robbing a bank because no one is a giant man with arm tattoos. Yeah. So
both times.
well, no, just the one
Oh.
time. The other time I just stared at the mirror a bunch and ended up getting talked down from my bad high because I ended up being alone.
Oh, dude, there was a time in my late teens where I went picking shrooms in a cow pasture, of all things, at the end of a road called Friend Street. And I picked a bunch of mushrooms, put them into a blender with some water. I didn't make proper shroom tea. I just threw some water and shrooms into a blender and gave them to a bunch of my friends who had never done mushrooms. One of my friends ended up overturning a table and hiding behind it in a corner of my shop, screaming, "Stay away from me, you demons." And another friend of mine managed to find an 8-foot A-frame ladder, and he was climbing up it to try to grab the moon. And I was trying to manage all this, being 17 or 18 years old. It was quite a night.
Well, thankfully, I just didn't rob a bank.
You only thought that you could.
Yeah, it didn't like make me want to rob the bank, but it was tempting me.
I'm telling you, there is nothing quite as life-changing as watching a 250-pound, 5'10" fat boy standing on top of an 8-foot stepladder trying to grab the moon out of the sky, and you realize this is my house and my property, and if any of these retards hurt themselves, I'll be liable for it. So I'm trying to get this guy off the ladder while my friend Jeff is holed up and building barriers around himself to protect him from the demons. And let's just say that was a rough night.
My first time that I did shrooms, I had been raving for a long time, so I had the whole beads and pacifier thing. And my friend came over with penis envy. Yep. And so we ate them and then went to a rave. And as these things kicked in, I felt so out of time. I felt so wrong. First, I think first I had this laughing, hysterical thing, and then nothing felt right in my hands, like nothing felt right when I was holding her or whatever. The lights were wrong, the sounds were wrong. I was in the wrong time, in the wrong place, and I really felt like I was somewhere in the future. So I wanted to go home. And the trip home was nice. I mean, all the streetlights were really pretty. And then when I got home, turned on the lamp, took off my shoes, and all of my accessories and stuff like that, and my feet on the carpet and the light of the lamp, and just sitting on my couch with like normal music felt more right. But it felt more like I was like in the 70s, like 60s or 70s. And I had this painting. Well, it was a print, but it was painting of Starry Night. And the way that Van Gogh paints with the dashes, and then the little dashes were all chasing each other around the paint. And I just looked at that painting for like 2 hours at least. But it's such a weird experience to feel so disconnected with my time.
I never did hallucinogenics or acid anyway, because I had a friend who basically shared that urban legend with the guy that got caught in the rain with a pocket full of acid.
The urban legend that I always heard was that a guy was driving through Arizona smuggling a flask full of liquid acid, and the flask came open and spilled on his leg, and he freaked out because it all absorbed through his skin, and he drove into a street sign and killed himself, which I'm sure is just as much an urban legend as yours is.
Yeah, well, ours, I think the urban legend we heard was kid went to school to sell acid, sold a couple that day, but there was a big party that night, so he got the rest of his acid stash, and on his way to the party, it started to rain, and it soaked. The acid was in his pocket. His pants got wet from the rain. It all entered his bloodstream, and he was an orange, in fear of getting peeled or something like that. Well, what happened to my older brother had a buddy named Don. I won't dox Don because he's fucking retarded. But he got a lot of acid and went to sell it at school, but freaked out while at school and ran home because he thought the cops were after him. And I know that because my brother was like the last person to see him as he ran out the door, screaming that the cops weren't going to catch him. And my brother had planned to buy acid from this dumbass and had seen how much he had, and it was in his chest pocket. And he ran 2.5 miles all the way home, and covered in sweat, it entered into his bloodstream. And he has not been right since. He's literally stolen things from me and tried to sell them to me.
Wow.
And, it's like half the time you're upset that he stole from you, and half the time you're just pissed that he's selling it for so little.
Are either of you aware of the idea that when you do a certain substance like shrooms, your experience is not your own? It's actually the cumulative experience of everyone before you who has done this substance. I've heard it a few times and I don't discount it because when me and Mistress did mescaline, we didn't do peyote because that's kind of hard to get, but there's a cactus called Peruvian torch that contains the same active ingredient as the peyote cactus, just not as strongly. So we went camping at Toledo Bend. We went to a Toledo Bend campsite. We set up our tent and we decided we were going to go for a hike. And we put a bunch of mescaline cactus into our Gatorade. And as we were hiking, we were drinking this Gatorade, which was full of mescaline.
It was pretty much the worst way in which to deliver it.
So it's broad daylight, like 11 a.m., and we're doing a hiking trail, drinking mescaline. And then I looked down at my arms, and my arms were covered in like Mayan symbols. It was just like ancient South American writing all over my whole body, which was weird because when I did shrooms, I see other things. And what did you see, Mistress?
What I saw was something very similar, but it wasn't just that particular time. It wasn't just on mescaline. I have also seen it plenty of times on mushrooms, where basically it's just everything is covered in, I've always described it as kind of a mix between Japanese characters and Egyptian hieroglyphics. And it's over everything, and it's gradually moving along.
Yeah, there's a theory that when you do a certain psychedelic, you aren't just tripping alone, you are seeing the cumulative trips of all the people going back thousands of years who have also done that drug. And McKenna said that ketamine and LSD were like empty rooms because not enough people had done it to create a fullness, to create something special. These were so new that they hadn't really been experienced by enough people. Me and Mistress, we did LSD a couple months ago, and it doesn't feel like a giant hand is pressing you into the ground, and it doesn't feel like the force of thousands of ancestors are trying to come through you.
No, it's generally quite happy.
But Mistress did become imbued with the power to flick a big lighter at me and bounce it off my head repeatedly.
Yes, that's great.
I think you're conflating your DARE classroom with your sex ed classroom. I don't know about doing drugs that are the same drugs that everyone else did before you, but pretty sure it was unprotected sex is like having sex with everybody your partner's ever had sex with, unprotected.
Well, what if it's not the cumulative effect of, because look, you were hiking in a deserty area and you took a deserty plant, and the people who took that plant were deserty people in a deserty area. And so what if the symbols
Dizzy,
on you?
I don't think Toledo Bend is a desert area.
Yeah. But
I
she's
thought
just saying, like, she's thinking you're suggestive.
what?
Just that it's highly suggestive. Like hypnosis.
No, I'm saying the symbols that those people created, that they created their language out of, that they created their stuff out of, that were most likely to use mescaline. Maybe that's where they got their symbols from. Instead of it being a cumulative effect on you, maybe it was just like the thing that inspired them to create those things that are specific to the people who had the most access to mescaline. That's what they saw.
Why is someone in the chat calling themselves Doc Illusion? What the fuck?
Is it not you?
No, it's not me.
But I already like them more.
Oh, fuck you, Jay. But as I said, me and Mistress, we have done shrooms, we've done mescaline, we've done lysergic acid amide, LSA, which comes from, in our case, Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds. And we've done pretty much all of the psychedelics, and it's only LSD, LSD 25, lysergic acid diethylamine, where we're just sitting at the desk throwing lighters at each other and giggling like idiots. There's no profound experience with LSD. We're just laughing our asses off, and her hair looks like a rainbow, and it's not deep, it's not spiritual. Maybe because it is so chemical and so modern, like what McKenna said about ketamine. I'm open to arguments. Go.
I don't know. I don't have a ketamine argument other than it wasn't even an experience.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's just highly suggestible behavior. People who've heard what happens on a drug experience that thing on a drug. People who haven't heard of that thing, I doubt, have a similar experience unless it's exactly coded to work that way.
Yes, it's pretty much the same as the idea of robot elves or whatever.
Machine elves.
I definitely wanted more breakdown on mechanical elves, but I did not get it.
Oh, you mean when James brought up the machine elves?
Yeah, I was like, clockwork elves. What the shit? Go back to that.
It's a very common thing associated with DMT, and to a degree LSD, thanks to McKenna.
Oh, so it's something McKenna wrote about. All these people have researched DMT and LSD, and so now they know about mechanical things, and so that's This
is something that, well, I think it might have been in the same DM group where this started, Dizzy, where a guy asked me about ayahuasca, and then he asked me about shared hallucinations. And it's a thing that almost everyone who smokes DMT sees these machine elves. And he was asking, well, what do you think? How are they all seeing the same thing? And I say, I don't know. Since the fucking early 90s, everyone's been writing about machine elves on DMT. Yeah. So when you smoke DMT, you're expecting to see machine elves. Yeah, seems like common sense.
If you read or listen to anything about Terrence McKenna, or if you go on to such places as Arrowhead or other such sites where people share their hallucinogenic experiences, you will read about machine elves. And therefore, if you take DMT or LSD or whatever, you will see machine elves yourself.
Let me tell you something.
Yes.
I'm curious about the DMT, but I am not curious about some machine elves.
I just want to know. I'm not actually like, hey, let's make friends with automated Keeblers or whatever.
Alex Jones thinks that the deep state, specifically CIA and NASA, are communicating with the machine elves and that they are a breakaway government and they are getting their orders from the machine elves. And that's why they're doing things that are so counter to our national interests.
So what you're saying is Alex Jones does DMT regularly.
No, he says he never does anything. He doesn't even smoke weed, but he's saying that the CIA and NASA are taking it very seriously, these machine elves, and that they're trying to communicate with them. And that's where a lot of our technology is coming from.
No, and no. The idea, all right, so back in the 60s, they were putting together the men who stare at goats, and they tried their Project Monarchs and their MK Ultras and all that. They had really bad effects that could not be predetermined. Like in one instance, in an MK Ultra project, they dosed a bunch of sailors who went to a whorehouse. And because they're completely retarded, one of these sailors murdered the hooker or the escort, the lady of the night, jumped out of the second story of the brothel and escaped into the streets to murder 2 more people before getting killed. And he was like the nephew of somebody really important. So if at any point you didn't think that the CIA was utterly incompetent, it goes to prove itself time and time again. Not that they don't have successes and that they're not very potent, but they're not nearly the geniuses that they've attempted to become. Sure, there's disinformation out there, but they're not looking to pass out the MK Ultra projects as things that they've actually done before. So while all of our clandestine operations or facilities or anybody within the clandestine community would put out disinformation about their clandestine activities, they're still stupid. At one point, we tried to kill Castro with a exploding cigar. We once mailed him. I recall that. Yeah, we once mailed him a snake that was poisonous. Like they're.
I'm sorry. We mailed him a snake that was poisonous.
There's no such thing as a poisonous snake.
Oh Jesus!
Snakes
Venomous.
are venomous, not poisonous.
So are bunnies, but you don't hear me complaining about it.
Hey, don't talk about bunnies. I've eaten a lot of them over the years.
Well, they're not poisonous. They're venomous.
Are you telling me that rabbits are venomous?
Are you telling me that they're not?
Yes, I am.
I cannot be convinced otherwise. Sorry.
Whatever she's smoking.
Snakes and spiders are venomous, not poisonous. That's just something that annoys me.
No animal is poisonous.
Plants are poisonous.
Frogs
Animals are
are.
venomous. There are certain frogs that cultivate poisonous toxins on their skin. Yes, you are correct.
Just watch out for bunnies, okay? That's all I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Jay, can you bring a little sanity back to this conversation?
That was not my point in being here. Sorry. I got hung up on the poisonous snakes thing.
Venomous.
Venomous.
Speaking-
God damn it.
Speaking
Jay,
of,
Jay, I'm really glad you came back on. Now, since you are back on, say something profound for our listeners.
I got nothing. I don't do profound. I do.
He does guns. He can tell you things about guns.
So
Yeah.
you'll talk shit in the chat about how I'm rubbing my last two brain cells together, but I bring you on.
Yes, I will. But that shit wasn't
What?
profound. I was safe. I'm pretty sure I was accurate.
I didn't say it was profound, but you'll talk shit in the chat, then you come on and now you don't want to talk shit?
Okay, I can get behind bloodfish and bufo-frogs, whatever, but platypus?
Bufo, yeah. Platypi, the male platypi, has a stinger
In his ankles.
in his ankle. Yep. Well, that's something I said earlier, but I got censored when you were talking about every animal has a cousin. I was like, duck-billed platypi, motherfucker, and it's like error occurred. Like, oh, I just got censored on the chat.
Yeah, we didn't realize that you had been censored. We didn't realize we had that set up.
No, I don't think it was you guys because it literally read as an error. But YouTube itself has like if you get 1,000 subs and you can get funding for like the live chat donations. If you're like, here's $20 N-word, they will not only restrict it from being shown, but they take that $20 and they donate it to a instead of it getting refunded back to the person and not being just omitted, they take that money and they donate it somewhere else to one of their charities. So basically, if you're a racist asshole on Super Chat, you're donating to Planned Parenthood or the SPLC or the ADL or straight up Mossad at this point.
Well, I mean, lovely. This is why I don't say nigger on my live streams, nigger.
I said N-word.
I don't say kike either.
Well, I'd appreciate if our channel didn't get deleted.
As long as you're not monetized, it kind of just goes away.
Yeah, there's no chance of that happening.
And I have 3 YouTube channels, and I don't monetize. I don't take donations. I don't do ads other than APAC. And anyone who's listening, Illusion Radio is sponsored by APAC. I don't monetize. I don't take donations.
Whoa. 3 channels, and you can't operate any of them. I see how it is.
Oh, I'm very good at just doing YouTube videos. It's the live streaming thing that keeps flummoxing me.
There was something really I almost sent this to the group chat, but it was a video by a flat earther. They were working on the International Space Station. And did you guys see this video of the astronauts in space working on the space station, and one of the doors was flapping back and forth? And they were just
Are we really trying to do a nigger thread in the chat?
Yeah, considering you were the second G.
That was my wife, actually.
I was bored.
Just say nigger, motherfuckers.
She never gets to do inward chains because she just has to keep her account.
She's
good.
never been banned. She is the one person in the alt-right who has
the-
never been banned from Twitter.
In the 6 years that I've had my account, I've gotten one warning, and that was about it.
I got a 7-day suspension for saying he identifies how he throws.
What in the world?
Yeah.
Hey,
They come hard on
You
the
cannot
trans.
talk shit to the trannies because they will off themselves.
To the people in the chat, just say nigger. This isn't Twitter. Just say nigger. It's allowed.
I don't think you can.
I can. Nigger, 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 nigger.
I was talking about typing it out.
Actual, like, typing it out.
We're censored. You censored.
Yeah.
You did a censored chat.
Let's see. Oh. Oh, okay.
Whoa. Wow.
Yep.
What did it say?
Error. Try again.
Error. Try again.
That's what I got when I said motherfucker.
How do we turn that off?
You can't. That wasn't your setting.
Well, you
What
can
the
apparently say kike.
You can say kike.
You know
Hang on.
what? That's all we need. We got the kikes, the dark kikes, the taco kikes.
Just try typing I hate kikes.
Okay.
Do you guys know the story of the kike?
Yes.
Yeah, when the Jews were coming into Ellis Island, you were supposed to make an X in a box, but the X was too similar to the crucifix, the symbol of Jesus, so they would make a circle instead, and kike is the word for circle.
Well, cat, yeah. But that's one of my it's right up there with faggot. I love the term faggot out of just wordsmithing.
I'm glad we didn't try to monetize this stream.
No shit.
I gotta go piss. Y'all can talk to my wife. I'm going to the
No.
restroom.
No. How dare you make her talk to us?
No, I'm not going to torture y'all by making you listen to me.
Oh.
No. He's gone now. You can be honest. How many times when he asks you, what did you experience on this drug or that drug, you just go, yeah, what you said, instead of explaining it. Like, there were these 6 great big male elves. They were blue. They were jerking off on my face. And you're like, yeah, same thing happened to me. Crazy. Exact same thing. No need to talk about it.
Wow, we experienced the exact same thing. No, for the most part, I think all the times we've ever done like psychedelics, being absolutely honest, the only time we've ever had a shared experience was when we were having sex.
Yeah, well. I'm not willing to sleep with him to find out.
What?
I'm not willing to sleep with him to find out.
He's great.
Take your word for it.
Oh, silly. Silly.
Jay doesn't love you here.
Oh, Jay does love me. He just doesn't want to tell people about our relationship.
Live mic, bro.
Yep. What are you ashamed of our love?
I'm ashamed of pretty much everything I have to do with you.
But I love you, Jay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that we have covered all that we can cover about psychedelics with these perspectives and
All right.
religious experiences.
Final question from me. I have had experiences through psychedelics where I truly think that I communicated with the creator. And ML who I'm talking about in one of our DM groups, thinks that I was possessed by a demon. So I want to get both of your thoughts, Diz and Jay, on that particular issue.
No wonder God has abandoned us. If the only experience he has with conversations with us is people who are high as all hell on some sort of hallucinogen.
I think they always have been. I think that all the prophets were. I think that the guy in Revelation was. I think that David was frequently. I think that Solomon was frequently. I think that all of these religious people were frequently very, very high. And I can't tell you if it was a ceremonial thing or a cultural thing or intentionally getting really fucked up. But I also believe that the Greek philosophers were stoned on something or everything at any point. I don't know if there were just random instances of extreme genius every once in a while, or if these renaissances that we've had throughout history, these leaps forward, were just smart people expanding a little bit and doing a bunch of drugs. And I can't tell you for a fact whether these extravagant lore and mythology came from something more than crafty language and a sharp imagination. I would think so. I mean, if you read Grimm's fairy tales, the language that they used when writing was fairly uncommon was crazy. And
Are we talking
I don't
about
know.
the style or just Middle German in general?
I can't read Middle German.
I was just wondering which part you're talking about. Like stylistically, then?
Yeah, the stylistic.
You're saying that these stories, like the Grimm's fairy tales and even the stories of the Bible, could have only come forth from a mind that was influenced by psychedelics or even marijuana, perhaps?
I'm not saying only. I'm not discounting the fact that there are just really good literary minds that existed, and that stories that were oral tradition didn't expand over time to be more fanciful and more dramatic and all of that. But I mean, look, when Greeks invented theater, the plays were really boring. If you've ever read the plays or seen them performed in the Greek method, very, very boring. Like monotone monologues for several of them, and then they added characters later on. And it really wasn't until people like Shakespeare got a hold of them and stylized them up that they became full of characters and stuff like that. But the Festival of Dionysus, who is the god of theater, was also the god of wine and sex and
Shakespeare was a black
drugs.
woman, right?
Dionysus was also in charge of insanity.
Who?
Dionysus?
Only the illusion of insanity.
No, the festivals of Bacchus were much more focused, which is the Roman version of Dionysus. Were much more. Women would rip their men apart during the orgy.
Mm.
Well, sometime soon, sometime soon we will be having a Black Israelite on the show. My
I
good
thought he
friend
was just about to say orgy. And I was like, I'm not coming to the orgy.
But according to my friend who is a Black Israelite,
Shakespeare
everything.
wasn't made. Yeah.
Well, he thinks that Shakespeare was black and Aristotle was black, etc. Great guy, but he has some interesting ideas.
Well, there is a possible story, possible truth that the picture we know as Shakespeare was actually a somebody who wrote critiques of Shakespeare's plays.
What?
I would
like
love a belief like that.
Yeah, like it was like the one picture we have of Shakespeare that's attributed to Shakespeare is more or likely less a person who commented in articles about the plays Shakespeare was performing at the time.
Well, there is a bust of Shakespeare over his tomb, and that bust is very brown, which is something that my friend Moshe always brings up when we argue about Shakespeare. He's like, well, the statue of Shakespeare on his own tomb is brown. That proves that Shakespeare was a black man.
Is it made out of brass?
No, it's made of stone, but it's had to be repainted multiple times over the centuries, and they always paint it brown for some reason.
Brown's a cheap color. Also, what? I am looking at Shakespeare's tomb, and I don't see a bust.
Look up "Is Shakespeare Black?" and you'll find the pictures of the bust. And I've seen them, and yes, he is very dark in the way they've painted his bust. But have you heard the crazy theories that Shakespeare's plays were actually written by a 12-year-old black girl? Anyone heard that theory?
I don't buy it from a second because the wives of rich noblemen couldn't read. So I doubt what Nicolette Longstockings was reading. I don't think so.
I'm not seeing a Shakespeare bust. That's
okay, here's some busts, but I don't see. I see a couple bronze busts now.
Geehart. Okay, Shakespeare bust by Geehart. Who's this?
These are white features.
This is fascinating radio, I'm sure, as everyone is furiously Googling.
Yeah, for all 6 people who are currently watching.
This is going to be a podcast.
I'm not about to put this on the Libsyn.
I'm not asking you to edit it. Just throw the whole thing up. I think it's
well, that's more fair.
There's nothing more exciting on radio than a bunch of people Googling shit. Hey, Jamie, can you pull up that picture of the gorilla pulling someone's dick off?
I will not watch the Joe Rogan podcast. Thank you very much.
It is brown. It is brown.
Not buying it.
It's somebody's sculpture of him.
It is brown. Repeat, it is brown.
Jamie, can you pull up gorilla dick? It is brown. It is. We're all going to hell. Embrace it.
No.
Weren't we wrapping this up?
Yes, let's wrap this up.
Yes, please.
All right. Let's go ahead and close things out. So, for those 6 of you still listening, I am Dr. Illusion, the host of Illusion Radio. You can find us at illusionofsanity.libsyn.com. You can find me on Twitter at DOUCHECC. My co-host on my podcast is Dizzy. Dizzy, tell them where to find you.
You can find me on Twitter at SableSunDiz and on Illusion Radio.
And Jay, you want to do any plugs?
Nope, you can't find me anywhere. Don't look. Don't bother. I'm good. Do not associate me with this.
Jay is the tech support and IT guy for Illusion Radio. You can find him online at JFry somewhere.
Damn my easily researchable name.
I love you, Jay.
At JFry. And he has a podcast himself. Drop your podcast, damn you.
I do a news analysis of the week on YouTube at JMagic77. JAYMAGIC77. Monday night.
I sometimes go there too.
9 p.m. Eastern.
All right. Well, Jay, we appreciate the tech support and you helping us to make this live stream possible. Diz, as always, thank you for helping be the co-host of the show. Mistress, say hi.
I've already spoken. Why do I need to say the obligatory hi?
Because I mention you. When I mention someone, they're supposed to say hi.
No.
Okay, Mistress refuses to say hello, but she is also involved. And thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been an interesting couple hours of chat. And Diz, what is the final consensus? Does DMT have demons in it or not?
No. But you might have demons in you.
Well, yeah.
Well, clearly. Jay, what do you think?
One person's demons are the opposite side's angels.
Way to hedge your bets, Jay.
That was my article. That was me throwing my deep think.
With that, we close the show. Just remember, donate to APAC if you want to make America great again. All right, that's the end of the show, guys. Jay, thank you for the help again.
Push the stop button.
You have to take it off alive.
Push the stop button.